So it's good to be with you again here in Vincent today. And I'm doing a sermon series on this text. So if you're following me on a circuit, anywhere from so far San Francisco to Plumsteadville, you're going to get the same text. So if you really like it, the next Sunday I'll be doing this is at Lakeview between Scranton and Binghamton. Someone last week asked me if they could get my itinerary in case they need redosing. What this text is today is super practical, and it's actually kind of unusual for me to be dealing with something that's got such a practice orientation. But in this particular time in our life as Mosaic, and as followers of Jesus in a contentious election season, I felt drawn to this text for us. And because we like to have as much anxiety as possible, the Mosaic Annual Assembly is the Saturday before the election on Tuesday. In the discernment process, set of interviews with Deep Rhine East, and watching call emerge. Matthew picked Mosaic, sent our resume. I remember looking at his resume. He didn't know there was an opening at Deep Rhine East. And there's something holy about watching call emerge. He just said to me last Sunday, he said, when I sent that email to you, he said, after I sent it, I wondered if everything is about to change. Matthew and his wife, Christiana, are newly Anabaptist. I haven't read her book yet, but I'll give you a little promo. Her book about their journey is called Mystics and Misfits. She has a background in creative writing. But this is the holy work that I get to do as part of Mosaic. And I'm grateful for that. The second piece that I'm grateful for, I'm beginning with the text, can you tell? A situation at Deep Run East that had lots of anxiety. Where's our pastor going to come from? The second piece that I'm really grateful for is to be part of a conference community at the moment where the leaders are on the same page. This is not an easy season. We've just come through this pathways process. For those of you who pay attention to conference stuff, you know. For those of you who don't, it's okay. The thing that I can say as an executive leader at this point, and a board and staff and a task force of diverse people on the same page, is pretty holy. When processes are hard, you want trusted and similarly minded, but not the same exactly minded teammates. I'm grateful for that. If you really, really want to know more, stick around after lunch and get into all the messy possible details. Not lunch, sorry, there's no lunch. I'm teasing you. I'm just going to be honest with you, Dave wooed me in my head with lunch. So that's how I committed to it. Yeah, that's my fault for not keeping my details straight. So the text for today comes from the end of Philippians. And Philippians is considered, when you hear people talk about it, it's often called a letter of joy. And what we know about the Philippians, I'm going to invite you to take a dive into the Philippians text, the whole thing this week if you haven't been there recently. And as part of our processes, this was spirit coincided. All of our gatherings for delegate prep are coming, the base prep scripture is coming from Philippians 2. But I've been preaching from Philippians 4. And so Philippians is a letter from Paul to a community that he knew well. It's the first Christian community in what we would call now Europe. It's sort of where the good news escapes across the whatever that little body of water is in Turkey that I can't think of the right name for, straits, across the straits, out of Asia, and into what we would now call Europe. And one of the interesting pieces of this, Paul knew this community, and he's writing it from in prison. If you've ever talked to anyone who's been in prison, or yourself been in prison, you know that letters and communication from the outside are important. One of my closest friends has spent 5 years away. And what he tells me is that prison gives you an opportunity to clarify things, and the relationships that are significant to you become even more so. So what we see from Paul in this letter is some really interesting stuff. You see Paul naming names in Philippians. The letter is filled with names of people he's connecting with in a variety of ways. People he wants to honor and appreciate and name. What it reminds me is that to be communities of joy, relationships matter. And how those transcend time and space also is significant. The other piece that Paul doesn't pull any punches, because he can while he's in prison, as he names a conflict that he's aware of. And he basically says, hey, the two of you, Dave and Steve, get your stuff together and stop scrapping. It's right in there in the letter. It's part of the story. The other thing that Paul deeply appreciates, which is something that you do really well at Vincent, is that this was a community that responded to needs in other places. They saw their sense of connectivity. Remember, they're the first European community, but they're actually sharing resources back towards Jerusalem. They were an outlier. Let's see if you can pick up on this. They were on the other side of the strait. Is anyone hearing something? Anyone think of yourselves as the other side of the river? I think that's how sometimes I've heard it. But the thing that happened from here, from Philippians, is we know that the good news spreads out and continues to move west. The good news also moves south and east, but that's not the particular part of this story. So in Paul's clarity, what I found here at the very end is something that I feel like is really helpful for us to look at as practice. So in Anabaptism, we talk about orthopraxy as much as orthodoxy. Remember, I'm Catholic background. So in Catholic tradition, you often talk a lot about orthodoxy, what's the right belief. And at a baptism, we talk a lot about also right practice. The two go hand in hand. And at the end of this, what Paul is reminding the community from prison is, here are some practices. And it's a really interesting set of transitions if you heard it from Anthony, and I have to make sure I got it by memory because I might get it backwards. The first thing is the promise that the peace of God will be with you, right? So the fruit, the peace of God will be with you. But when we complete the set of practices, Paul actually flips it. The God of peace will be with you. So you won't just have the sense of it. It actually showed up in one of your songs. Like, God will be with you through these practices. Dave and I attended a seminar that we hosted at the Mosaic offices this spring that came from the Barna Group, which has a lot of Southern Baptist connections and has broad interpretation in the mostly evangelical world. What they said in that seminar that we attended that was significant to me and also relates to our text here and our context is that for many persons in the church right now, they feel like they're under siege. That the culture around us is eating away at the pieces of our culture that are familiar to us. And so that it disorients us or makes us feel like we don't know what to do or makes us feel like we need to hunker down to be safe. The other thing was that there was a crisis of mental health in the church. Anxiety, right? It comes exactly from the passage. In about 2021, I got an urgent phone call from Wayne Mumbauer, who is at Penn Foundation. Penn Foundation is affiliated with Mosaic Conference as a ministry, even though now it's part of St. Luke's. Wayne is one of our most communicative ministry partners. He asked me to come to the office. Even when there was the process of merging or whatever the reaffiliation with St. Luke's, I had not seen Wayne as stressed. But Wayne called and asked me to come see him because he said, we see, this was after 2020, a mental health crisis coming. And he said, there is not good infrastructure. And the church is going to see it. He said the stresses around anxiety that have emerged during COVID and the stress that has come from us being disconnected from each other and the sort of stress that many of us carried about being afraid of catching COVID had become generalized. And he said there was nothing in the system that was ready. So I said, okay, thank you, Wayne, for this alert. And he said, I'm just warning you, congregation should be prepared. And your pastors should also be ready. So we live in a time where the church feels under siege, and many of us, remember he wasn't saying this was a crisis that was going to be outside of the church, this was going to be within. Many of us are carrying anxiety that's been heightened. What can we do? Paul gives us 4 critical steps so that we can practice in ways that we know that the God of peace is with us. The first piece is turning from grumbling or complaining to rejoicing or gratitude. It is really easy for us to notice the things that are going on around us and the things that are wrong. It is sometimes harder for us to celebrate the gifts that God has given us already. So for me, coming from Western Pennsylvania, from an Eastern European culture, it's a much more visibly celebratory culture. There's dancing. I can't polka, but theoretically there's dancing. There's loud music at times. There are festivals. In what ways do we evidence the celebration of God's goodness for us? I want to joke around with you at Vincent about one thing. I think the way you might celebrate is to work harder. God's been good to us, so we rejoice in that, and we're going to put in another extra 8 hours. I've also learned that in Eastern PA, one of the things that you can celebrate and be loud about is actually Phillies or Eagles. That's permissible. But in what ways are we able to express our rejoicing and our gratitude to God? In ways that don't feel trivial. In ways that are evidenced through our work, the gratitude that is evidenced not just in our hard work, but in the way that we carry out our work. What is it that we are able to say, like, I am rejoicing rather than grumbling? This is the day. Not just yesterday, that the Lord has made. And the text is, we will rejoice and be glad in it. individual and shared. In what ways? Can we be known as a rejoicing community rather than a community beset by fear and anxiety and grumbling and complaining? The second piece, I'm doing by memory, so if I get them out of order, you can flag me or just bear with me. The second piece is gentleness over harshness or violence. Last summer, you may have heard me talk about this already, I did an internship at Nazareth Hospital in Philadelphia, and it was pretty chaotic. And I learned a lot, and I continue to revisit the things that I learned there by serving as a chaplain in diverse context. What I learned is it's really easy to escalate violence and confusion and anger. It requires something different of me to try to reverse it. It requires something different of me to say something that invites people to be peaceable rather than continue to be fearful. I was not perfect at it, but I learned over and over again. No matter who I was encountering, if there was a way to approach them gently, something different might happen. There was a day with a very agitated African-American Muslim patient who didn't feel like he was being treated well, he was Muslim, and I walked into the room and greeted him with my 6 of the 10 words I know in Arabic. And all of a sudden, something different opened. By the end of the conversation, he said, "I don't trust this place, but I trust you." There was a Jewish woman who was too big for her bed and too big for any hospital gowns. And she was hungry. And the staff outside the room were making fun of her. I remember thinking, how do I do this graciously? How do I enter this room and try to do anything different with her, for her, with her? So I asked graciously, how do I enter your room well? She said, "Come in to the left." And then she told me how scared she was, and how embarrassed she was, and how hungry for roast beef she was, and how she could hear what they were saying in the hall. There was a Spanish-speaking woman from Guatemala whose Spanish was her second language. I was a Spanish-speaking chaplain. She kept saying, "I don't understand you." Okay. And the nurse there said, "I am very afraid for her because she was significantly abused by her partner. And that partner is going to be released by the police today. And there are no restrictions." The nurse and I, this is live cast, but I'm done, so. The nurse and I conspired to find a way to bring a Spanish-speaking pastor in to talk to her. We did break the rules, kind of. But when she expressed her needs, we felt like we needed to go above and beyond where we were at. Being able to respond to violence with gentleness or kindness opens the possibility for the good news. What is it, in the settings that we are in on a regular basis where it's not necessarily aggressive, but it's also that the person is a non-person? How do we meet those situations with kindness? How do we not treat persons as if they are a transaction? How do we not treat persons who are different from us as if they are an obstacle, or their language difference or their cultural difference is a problem for us? How do we meet that with kindness that opens the possibility of peace for them and for us? The third piece, or the second piece, whichever the order there is to turn towards prayer. I grew up in a 3-generation household, and I'm an only kid. Let me tell you what that means. 2 full generations worried about you all the time. My most frequent conversation I remember with my grandpa was, "Stop running." I love my grandpa. But there was a heightened level of concern in a 3-generation household, a heightened sense of fear, also as the only kid. I grew up in a context where there was a lot to be afraid of. 8 of my grandpa's siblings had died before they were 15. It's the early 20th century. My mom grew up in an abusive household. Those were the 2 people who were the most worried about me. My friend Dave Landis is an adventurer. He plans trails all over the world, sometimes working in Kurdistan right now, in the region between Turkey and the northern part of Iraq. One of the things that Dave says is that the most stressing situations for him is to travel with people or to work on a project with people who don't admit that there are real risks. Dave's worked in crisis situations. You know that when you're traveling with those persons and they're ignoring that there are things to be concerned about or cautions to take, when something rough happens, there's no backup plan. What I think this invitation for us is to not pretend there are not risks out there, to not pretend there aren't things to be concerned about, to not turn a blind eye totally to the challenges that are around us, but it is to notice those things and to turn them over to God. So for me, that process is regular. And it goes something like this. Here, God, I would like to give this to you. Maybe not. I would like to hold on to this. So, maybe you can have this today. Or for now. Do you have it? Mm-hmm. Sure? Really? Mm-hmm. In what way? The invitation for prayer is to continue to offer that back to God. Even when it needs, for me, means it's a regular morning and evening practice to turn those things over. And to be kind to myself when I'm struggling to let it go. To continue to practice it. To continue to lay things at God's responsibility, not my own. And to try to loosen my own grip. And to try also not to be so ridiculous. Like, notice how I asked Dave, in what ways do you have this thing? Can you just give me the details on that? How is it that we are able to let those hard things, the things we know that are challenges, really in God's hands? When we put these things into practice, we are able to have the peace of God that passes understanding. The final section here from Paul gets us at something that in my doctoral research is called, let's see if I can say it today, because sometimes I fumble it. It's a complicated word. Phenomenological focus of attention. I got it. What it means is the thing that you pay attention to, the thing that you give attention to. So my parents are recently retired. They're in their early 70s. My dad retired first, and then my mom about 2 years later. One of my dad's favorite my favorite things that my dad has said to my mom is, "Don't ruin my retirement." So one of the ways that my mom has ruined my dad's retirement is this. My dad was listening to a lot of news all day. The TV was on all the time. My mom has implemented a new rule. If she hears the same news story 3 times, the TV is off. She's like, if it's the same story and it hasn't changed and it's still stressful, it's done. That's been an ongoing conversation with my parents. When we think about what it is that we're paying attention to, right? What it is that we're focusing our energy on, it is easy for us to get sucked into things that distract us from being prayerful and gentle and peaceful. What is it that we are focusing on? The things that are lovely, the things that are true, the things that are beautiful, the things that can be affirmed, the things that we notice around us that we appreciate. But notice it also says the true. That does not mean we ignore difficult things. It might mean we sort out what is really true. This invitation for me is one that continues to challenge me. It has made me reorganize my social media to some degree. I think it should affect everything down from what's in our bookshelves to what we're watching on television to what YouTube we get sucked into. To what music we listen to what conversations we attend to what conversations we walk away from gently. I'm going to say this. This week someone posted something on Facebook, a former parishioner of mine, someone I love. And sent me a text. They're not going to hear this today, but she knows exactly what I did. She said, "I just put something on Facebook. I'm curious what you think about it, about the election." I didn't look at it. My text response back was, "Jesus is Lord. I do not trust either political party to carry out the reign of God." I looked later. And I think she said something like, "That's kind of what I thought you were going to say." I knew that conversation wasn't going to go anywhere helpful. I managed to not get sucked in. I'm not always that good at it. But what is it that we're able to pay attention to? What is it that we put our energy towards? And in what ways does that extend the peace that surpasses understanding? So Paul's invitation here is to put this all into practice. What I want to say to you all is there is no way we're practicing this perfectly. But just like you practice piano, or go to soccer practice, or practice an art or a trade, we live into doing it well. And what Paul says to us, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you, with